gods have favored you with a recording of this session. If you are in witness protection, we advise you to digitize yourself at this moment. Thank you. And
thank you so much.
I'll return to my lair now. Thank you. See you later.
Great.
Have fun, folks.
Appreciate that.
Sure thing.
All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I think everything is set on my end. Let me go ahead and share my screen. On here. All right. Everything's good to go here. Today we're going to talk about aligning your security requirements, right, with Microsoft 365. So we have a few people online here, and maybe in our chat here you can just run down with maybe what some of your roles are, just to see if we're talking with people that are more admin or business user. That might help in the end, right? So as we're going through this. So my name is Vanessa Toves. I actually am a 365 solution architect, and we've got a couple of housekeeping slides here. I wanted to absolutely say a big thank you to our hosts that were part of putting this event together. And if you haven't already taken a look at our support of the Chicago Public Schools, feel free to do so now. Right? And the same thing, if you have some time at the end of all of this or the end of your sessions today, provide some feedback. Right? It's always good and helpful for the organizers to see if where everything is good in terms of what your experience was, what went well, what didn't, what you'd like to see next time. Absolutely, big thank you to our sponsors, for supporting this. I think without them, without any of the support that we get from the sponsors and other, speakers as well, all the volunteers, it wouldn't go off as seamless. So. And of course, stay around to take part in all the giveaways and the raffles. These are always a fun thing when you're doing these conferences on premise. So let's get started. So I have worked with Microsoft 365 or really Microsoft technologies for many years. Right, the very first version of SharePoint and the BI suite of tools, all the way up into the cloud. So. I've had the opportunity of many nights with pulling my hair out as new patches were released or new service packs, but then have just absolutely have loved the investment that's been made in this cloud platform. Right, Microsoft 365. It's an amazing productivity platform. There is no other one better out there. Right, so. With that being said, right, it's so big, right? 365 is very big and it's very wide and it's very deep, especially in its administration. So for what you can absolutely control, right, we want to look as much as possible to plan, right, prepare, act. Now we have slides as we're going to go through here, and if we get through these, we're going to, I'll come into a live demo just to actually look at some of the things that we're talking about. Now, let's jump into this, right? So companies today, I think we all know we're facing threats throughout, not just with 365, but we're talking about everything from a laptop, desktop, mobile devices, into our, cloud-based applications, third-party apps, whatever it is. I mean, it's just amazing. In the time I've been in technology, there's never been a more, I guess sometimes perilous time, right? There's so much being attacked in a sense, or potentially compromised. So this is what companies have to do. There's a number of departments and teams in an organization that they all have different functions. And across an organization, whether you work in risk management, you work in InfoSec, information security, you're putting the DR plan together, or you have to deal with, so these are all like really core functions that IT has in their underneath that umbrella. And really throughout that it only takes just one point of vulnerability at any time. A number of these things, companies face that over the last couple years. A few big ones where, of course, it was a third party. So it doesn't even have to be something that you're doing necessarily, or that your organization hasn't done. But these threats that we face about securing our information, they're coming from all different areas, right? So one point of vulnerability in that, in this month or in this week or in this day, those are the things that can make a difference. Now, with all of the access, right, all the data that we have, and this access anywhere, with every IT, of course, there's the goal, right? No compromise of data, no loss of information, be it sensitive or non-sensitive, and that's harder and harder to do, because especially we'll focus now, right, very specifically on 365. This data, because it can be accessed anywhere, the compliance that we have to deal with, the security of mobile devices, right? Even our Wi-Fi that our users are getting on, or guest Wi-Fi's. I mean, there's so many points where the data crosses, and whether the compliance that we deal with is either an internal compliance, or even external compliance from some regulatory that we have to right, stay in compliance with, it's harder and harder. And it also becomes in 365, it also becomes like license dependent at times as to what you could do underneath the 365 umbrella. And so it's harder and harder to keep things and ensure that we have this kind of both a plan and visibility. And the one of the core things about that too is the investment that an organization makes in its 365 team, right, on the back end. No longer do we have just an Exchange admin, right? Oftentimes, the admins that we have today might have to be an Okta admin, a Jira admin, a 365 admin. So there may not be as much depth opportunity for someone to be able to get in here and configure, right, conditional access, because there's just not enough time in the day. But we have to know where we can at least make these, right, affect things, what we can do to help both, as an organization, from an IT perspective, maintain that security, right? Do not have any compromise of data, loss of data, or sensitive data. Now, I'm not here to talk about whether a company should pay or not pay in terms of ransomware. That's a business decision. But ultimately, we have to understand, how are we going to respond, right? How do we respond? What can we do with 365 if we're dealing with a ransomware effect, right? A ransomware issue. A lot of this too comes with where we are today. What problems did you solve? What problems are you solving? And what problems will you be solving next year or the next 3 years? What are you going to be adopting underneath this 365 umbrella? But the core threats to your data, and why we have to look at and really emphasize what we secure and in the manner in which we secure it, right? Compromised credentials, endpoints, cyber attacks, and for me, I talk about also users with access. Whether that access is an admin, or it's a person, an end user, or even a third-party vendor, right, or a partner that we've had to deal with. So as your organization is beginning to adopt more and more of 365 apps, like if you're one of the organizations that just had to jump into using Microsoft Teams in the last 18 months, it wasn't part of your plan. You weren't going to be doing it immediately, but you had to, because with the whole COVID and lockdown, your VPN environment was not intended to have every single employee on your net, logging into your through your VPN at one time. Right, so all of these things that drive us to use different parts of 365, right, that adoption over time and into any one of these apps, that equates to this exposure that we have to make sure that we're we're focused on covering, right? So what can we do? What can we do as a company? Part of this is also, I kind of talk about like your relationship to information management, right? And how mature are you in that process, right? I have, as an organization, do your employees live in the I, me, mine world, right? This is my file. These are my files. This is my stuff. And they'll protect that and house that and hoard it, whether it's on their desktop or right in their OneDrive. Or are you a we, our, us? And the difference between these two will drive how you utilize things like sensitivity labels or retention labels or any kind of automated tagging of files to use retention as a good example. So in building intranets or redoing right environments where people were using SharePoint, a lot of it has to come from an understanding of where you are, my role as a function. I never really liked using the My Site way back in the day, or even OneDrive, right? I professionally, I believe that everything I work on is either part of a project, part of an initiative, part of my role, part of my team. And you can have you can have an architecture that supports that. But more of these things that are dumped into a single user's OneDrive becomes also this potential for you to lose data, right? If that person, of course, leaves, or forgotten data. So think about this question, right? Where are you? You might be even somewhere in between. But the closer you get to this we, our, us model of how you architect your teams, your groups, right? Your SharePoint, all of that, that'll help you to utilize some of the things we're going to talk about later, which are, more automated labels and such, right? So the other thing that affects what you can do is what capabilities you have from a licensing perspective, right? Most businesses, medium, large, and enterprise, they're either an E3, right, or potentially, great if you're an E5. I mean, it's always nice that you can get to an E5, right, where it makes sense. But every one of these really is what you can do is dependent, and it's sometimes very painful to see that for half of your users, because you're an E3, you only have X capabilities, right? The other half have Y. So getting to these points of having and being able to utilize the features in 365, whether you're going to use the MFA right features or whether you're going to use, advanced e-discovery methods, right? All of these things, you have to look at the underlying value of and discussion around the cost of it. Now, it's always a hard thing when we're talking about trying to upgrade our license. Right now, right? The cost can be enormous for some companies, right? The bigger you are, the more you're going to double your 365 cost if you want to jump to an E5. But it's what it does allow you to do and protect. So you have to kind of make the statement of, sure, it costs X, but what is it going to cost us if we don't, right? It goes back to that, that old adage of, yes, which one do you want to do? Do you want to save money now, or do you want to potentially lose data because we couldn't use these other features? How are we going to do this? So where you have a gap, you have to look to make the case about what it would mean if we couldn't use these things. So if you only have certain capabilities for half of your users, I think putting it on a matrix and challenging your leadership to understand, yeah, we can protect these users, or we can use a certain amount of retention, for the, not retention, sorry, we can use hold information for, I'm just trying to think of a good example off the fly, and it's just not coming to me. So I'll have to think about it as I'm going through this. The point being, your licensing absolutely can help. If you can standardize at least across your users, so you're at least being able to use a lot of the protection features or the advanced features across all of your users, right? So now we'll talk about these, we'll go back to these challenges, right, that IT has to face. We'll talk, right, we'll jump into, we won't be able to talk about every one of these, but we'll pick and choose throughout here. So your information security risk management. One of the things that we look at when we deal with this one is your data classification, right? Now, remember what I talked about, because this I, me, mine, or we, our, us has an impact on how you lay out, how you architect your teams, your groups, and where people put things. All right. So if you are all a OneDrive shop and barely using, your SharePoint, the underlying SharePoint for your teams, and everyone lives in the OneDrive, you have to think about the impact as we start looking at these services. Now, data classification is one of the most powerful things that you can use in 365 on the back end, because it's what you can do with it after you define some classifications, right? A simple classification that we talk about, we use that already. You see it every day. Whether you or your kids are using any one of these streaming apps from Disney Plus to Netflix, I used to use the example all the time of your Apple Music, or what was it called back in the day? I forget the name of it now. But if you didn't, if Disney did not have tags about something, that it was a child show, right? That it was a certain, it was PG-13, that it was a drama, whatever it was, right? As part of the Marvel world, your ability to interact with that data would be very painful. And we also talk about, I use this example really a lot on the front end of like the SharePoint search for many years. If you want a better search result, you need to tag your files, you need to tag your pages. The same goes for being able to use some of these automated features in the back that can auto tag. So if something has a certain feature or has a certain words, it can auto tag something. But that's kind of the concept, is that we have to start with this mindset of classification of information. In a healthcare, it could be, what practice it's in. It could be, right, the orthopedic. It could be, I don't know, or maybe even in healthcare, the location of something, this hospital, that hospital, whatever those may be. The better we are at defining an information management model, the better you can protect this data with some of the features on the back end. Now we'll just talk about, some sensitivity labels, or, I like to use a very simple model. It doesn't have to be complex. And these things of, right, as simple as it gets, it's something you can communicate back out to your employees. As you have new employees, they need to understand that, yes, this is where we save it, but also this is what this means. If we were to lose this particular file, if this file were to be compromised or lost, or I could not recover that file, if it was, infected with malware, I couldn't use any of the version history to get this file back. What is its impact to us? So the labels that you might use from a, sensitivity perspective, we'll just use that one. Those are they can be very simple, but they need to be pushed out to your user base. And then from that point on, they need to be driven down into your tenant, right? And reminded. So I look at this one, I started doing this a couple of years ago, where, helping people understand that you're in absolutely the legal contract site, but it has a sensitivity label of X. You need to relay back to the users the importance of what that data is in there to the organization, right? So if you can drive that down to them and help them see exactly what it is that's in there, from how sensitive it is, right? Whether you tag an entire SharePoint site collection with that label, or you allow them to tag it internally, right? You may not want everything in there, but at least you're reminding them that this is the level of which, of we need to be more, right, more mindful or more careful. And you can do the same thing with your teams, of course, right? If you create a team, you're creating a site collection. So how I would do this is, because I don't always want to affect the email address that's being created. So like for an executive leadership team, what I would do as I was rolling something out, I would create an ELT group, and I knew that would just create the simple, right, ELT@company.com. But then I would just rename that. I would rename it, and I'd put some type of label behind it that identified the sensitivity of that. Like, how sensitive is this data? Now, do you have to do it to every single one? No. But at some point, we need to have some ownership or some auditing of how sensitive is this data. Whether you're teaching your owners, your site owners, on at least doing something like this, or if you're the one that is actually creating these teams, you can have your own model in which you're creating a team, right? The format that your email is in, as well as the title in which you do it. And if you apply the sensitivity label to the entire thing, or if, right, you train your users to say, you should tag that manually, right? Just ultimately, the point about this is creating these labels that identify sensitivity of data of information, and then communicating that and driving that down into it and in front of the users will always reinforce this investment that you're making in these classifications of information, right? Whether it's a sensitivity, and in some cases, right, retention labels. So we'll talk about retention now. Now, there's a lot of data in 365. Absolutely. And some organizations can have a blanket statement that says everything needs to be kept, or right, depends on what regulatory you have to comply with. That also defines what you have to keep. But who, what, when, why, and where, right, and across what devices. The who, whether it's a prior employee, active employee, all the way down into the files or the types of information. Now, if we talk about the impact of the growth of your environment over time, you will, as an organization, hit a point where you're going to exceed, right, this cost of your storage. There's no doubt. It happens already, right? Companies that migrated in here 3 years ago or 5 years ago into 365, right? Whether they've already hit it themselves, but they've hit these points of, we have so much in our environment. We have 300 terabytes. How's that possible? Of our SharePoint. There's a cost to that. So this is what will help when you're defining retention, breaking this down into very specifically, what do we need, right? What do we need to protect? What do we have to keep? Where do we have to keep it? Whether it's, in 365, or if you also have, right, Google Drive still or whatever, and across what devices. And that applies to both your data that's underneath there, and as well as like the backups that you have for any of your 365 data. Now, we touch base on this barely, but the cost of storage is expensive, right? The last time I checked, it's like $200 a month per terabyte, right? And that's something that when we're talking about your SharePoint, what's painful sometimes is that companies that were on-prem, they've got a SharePoint farm. They started in 2003, went to 2007, 2010, and they just kept taking and dragging along all of this data. And they never applied any kind of retention. They never kind of went through any kind of cleanup or put in place a process to help, mitigate that, because they were able to control it with right? It wasn't a big deal if they had big databases, because or their SharePoint farm was extremely big, because they would just add more storage. You're going to do the same thing with 365. So you have to consider what your growth rate is year over year, and whether or not you can come back in and turn around and get rid of things that you don't need. Right. So I call this one, like, I have this conversation all the time about Teams, about SharePoint, about not necessarily OneDrive, but there's a point in time where you always have to look at all of these site collections and these teams to say, one is, are there any owners? Is there still anyone accessing this data? When was the last time anything was modified? You need to have some kind of policy that can help you do this. One of the simplest things I've done in the past is I actually created a SharePoint site and created a list, and I would export all of the data out of the SharePoint, right, out of SharePoint, which has your last modified. It has a lot of information in there, and I would kick off a flow. Ultimately, I just, to keep it simple, it was just, hey, if this is still active, right? If this, it send an email to the owner, if there even was one. And it would say, if this is still valid, please go back, please click here, go back to the site, because then if someone went back to that site, we would know that the last modified date would increment. And if they didn't respond, or if they did respond, they would give you the reason, the justification that says, no, we don't need this anymore, or I don't know, let me take a look at it. And so you have to have some kind of process to keep this data of yours down, because remember, the goal is, if I have, let's just say 60 terabytes of data in here, how do I know what is valid and what is not as an admin? So try as much as possible to involve these owners, to keep them involved. If there is no owner, you either need to find an owner for it, and if it's not valid, stick it into a process where it's the time that you're going to start counting down to when you delete it. Right? If there's no understanding what's in that data, get rid of it. Otherwise, it will have not only an impact on your your environment, your storage cost, but also potentially, right, any risk of what's in there. What data is in there. And then, yeah, so let's continue on. All right, now let's kind of talk about some security requirements that we have. Now, I actually I spoke at another conference not too long ago, and this guy actually had this amazing presentation about how he showed how you could attack or hack through AD. It was a very interesting presentation, but I thought he was a great resource to look at some of his, some of the posts that he has. So the point being in this is that from a security perspective, not everything is always cut and dry. I mean, there's absolutely, vulnerabilities that Microsoft faces that they work on every single time, right? Whether they find the vulnerability or someone reported it, but there's always people out there that are trying to break it on purpose, for in some cases for a good reason. This guy has some great content that you should take a look at. Now, we'll kind of go down through a number of maybe the applications and even the settings in here. One of the first things I try to do to talk to companies, right, when I'd be rolling out, especially Teams, is all of these apps. Now, every month you get new apps. You just don't know it, that get added into this gallery of apps. Now, a couple of things about these apps. Some of them are right, they're user authorized. The user can go in there. They might have a monday.com account, and they want to bring this app in. And you have to think about, one, the data that you have is not only, especially if they're using these apps, right? They're beginning to use these apps and move data into them, right? Smartsheet, as an example. I mean, I think Smartsheet has some value. It has some things, right? Good things that Excel doesn't have, or that we even collectively doesn't have. However, you have to ask the question of, do we want the data that people are going to be putting into these apps going to some other cloud? I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? If a user uses these apps and no one knows anything about it, and they're saving this data off into some third-party cloud, that's you losing control of this information, right? So we have to challenge ourselves. You can either shut everything off and only allow specific ones, or if, as I've seen, most people, they just set it and forget it, and all of these apps are here. And as users go, if they can, they will, right? Whether it's something simple as like I don't know why many people would use big news necessarily, but the ones that really begin to transfer the fact that you know I'm saving an Excel file, whether it's financials, budget, any of that, and now putting it into a different app that you have no idea about. Make that decision, understand, right? Create a policy about it. I had a client that actually, at one time, all of these apps had to be registered with their legal department and anyone using them. Otherwise, they would shut them down as quickly as possible. And so, and this was also not just the apps in Teams, but also browsers and the URL specific that would lead to right to any of these. But so consider what you want to do, what you need to support, and if you want your data going into these third-party apps. Right, it's part of kind of your compliance in here. Now, we talk about this big behemoth of a back-end platform and your 1,000 users. Well, all of the activity that your users have, it gets audited. So you've got alert policies that can fire off in the background, right, in the admin. And depending on your license, right, for an E3 and E5, you have more alerts than others. But there are default policies that are out there that they're just beginning to fire. I've seen more companies just leave this alone than not. But the reality is you should use these, right? Or you just shut them all off. Because if you are using this, it's here to help you understand what is happening, but can't necessarily see. Right, keep it simple. Start off with the ones that are most common. Which ones are firing? And these severity alerts. Now, you can. I usually would just go create a new one and not touch the one that was out of the box. But you can customize these alerts from a security perspective. You can say, oh, if I get this alert, I want it to go send an email to my ticketing system and put the subject line in, and it opens up a ticket on my ticketing system. Right, it's hard when you have these cloud applications, not just 365, but if you're using, anything, any Salesforce or using any other applications that all have their own admins, and you have this ticketing system, and then someone has to look in different places. People are going to get tired of getting these emails, and as I've seen so many times in the past, these global admins start getting these alerts, and they put, a rule in place that says, go put this in this folder, and they never look at it. Look at this. Right? These are things that you can do. Remember, what is within your control, do as much as possible. Right? Some of these alerts, they might be data, right? They're going to be data specific. So and so did this. And if it leads back to a team, you must consider to include these owners of content. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but when we're talking about this big overarching goal, no compromise of data, no loss of sensitive or any, right? No compromise of data, no loss of data. We have to make the effort here to use what we have, at least within this 365 world. And these are the types of things too that as you address them, you can report on it back to your organization. It's a great source of saying, here's what we have. These are the alerts, right? If you're looking for additional resources for your team, you can bring this data to light and say, we don't have the manpower right now to deal with this. So right now we've got these impossible travel alerts and we just can't go deal with it because we just don't have enough people. You can use it to also justify your case for additional resources, right? So report on this data that's coming out of here. Now, some of these things that you can do, and let's just say that you're going to put it into your ticketing system, right? You send an email. The easiest one is this impossible travel as an example of what you can do, right? The impossible travel alert, go create a ticket, go send an email, or if you want to integrate, right? If you're going to integrate this into your whatever your ticketing system is. But you can create a process that's very simple. It doesn't have to be complex, right? And I know from a IT perspective, oftentimes IT is the worst at uh, documenting or creating policies that they want to follow themselves. I mean, I've been part of IT, so I understand that. But the response for those alerts don't have to be complicated. Impossible travel alert, right? Force a log out, reset the employee's password, right? Scan that device for any malware, blacklist the IP. And if you are a larger company and you have some training, send them a training link. That's an open and closed case. Otherwise, what happens is that that's right, as they're called, right, the bad actor is going to continue. They're going to continue knocking. Right? That user, in some way or some form, their information is out there in a way that someone is trying to access your data. So if you don't have a simple enough plan for any of the alerts, even if you had 4 active alerts and you had 4 active plans, of what you're supposed to do, how your team is supposed to respond, it doesn't, it's better to have it for these 4 or however, whichever ones you want, but have a plan, right? Embed it within your ticketing system and then communicate with people. This is what we do. This is how you use the back end of 365 to help you keep your data secure. That audit log that right is underneath these alerts that is one you've got is once again dependent upon license, right? I think the E3 holds it for 90 some days, 90, 93 days, holds your audit. And E5 holds the audit for 365 days. If you have mostly E3s, then, set up some schedule that exports that audit log on a regular basis, because the audit log is something where you're going to do a big CYA, right? This user downloaded this file from this IP on this day. They did it 2 days before they left the company, and it was our sales and marketing info. By no means was it financial information, but they took some asset, and you now have a legal case against them. And if this stuff drops off, this audit log drops off, you don't have that detail, right? So if you're in an E3 situation, export. If you're an E5, right, you've got 365 days. I mean, you still need to have some mechanism to hold that. Whether you also at that point also export to someplace. There are some tools that you can use to connect to this to your audit log, but if they start dropping off, right, and you lose that data and you needed it, even if it's on the 370th day, and you needed that data for that person of what they did, it's just not going to help you. So do what you can to hold this audit log data. It's just as valuable for you. With all of your between the alert policies and the data that's coming in and being recorded in this audit log, right? No response is absolutely a response. And I always would say that this audit log, just as good as it can help you, it is also what I've seen in a couple of very specific instances, a career-changing event, right? That means it alerted every single day for 7 days. And then something happened and you lost information or something was compromised. And this is what this log is holding and telling you. And it only takes someone to query it to see that there was no action on the back end, right? There was no action by you or your team or anyone else in your IT, and that's very painful, right? When it's something that can be avoided. Just double checking my time here. All right, good. Third-party access. Here's the thing, as a consultant, right? As a consultant, the first thing I would do, the number one thing I would do is with this IT team or whoever I was engaging with, I would create a policy that monitored myself. Because most of the time, most organizations, and I've dealt with large ones, right? It doesn't matter, small, medium, large, enterprise. A lot of them don't do these types of things. But if you have vendors that are coming in and using, that are part of your environment, if you have someone that's doing a migration and you've had to give them global admin access, create a policy, put them in there, monitor what they're doing to ensure that, hey, you're supposed to be working on, you're supposed to be doing something, but why did you go to the HR secured, right, secured file site? Why were you in there? You have to stay on top of it. You have to almost, assume, unfortunately, that everyone that's coming in that is not one of, specifically not one of your employees, that they have the opportunity to go and look at things that they shouldn't. And in some cases, and in most cases, they don't, right? As a consultant, even today, I do not. I have access to so much. I don't go poking around. One, I don't have time. And two, that's not my moral code. But not everyone is like that. Create an alert policy for your third party vendors, have it send a ticket, to your ticketing system, have it email whoever, have it email the sponsor to say, why is this person in here? That person deleted X, Y, and Z. It's not a big deal if the alert was valid, it fired and it notified you and it was valid. Great, right? Close it and say, yeah, no, this is okay. Right? These policies will learn from your actions by closing it or saying, no, this is fine, or whatever the action is, whatever the response is that you're saying when that alert fired. But especially, right, include their sponsors in communication if they've kind of done something outside of what you thought they were there to do. And you can have more than one policy for vendors. It makes it easier when especially if you're dealing with the ticketing system. Create a policy per vendor, for whatever the SharePoint consulting company that's doing the migration. Right. Let's talk. We're going to wrap with our data recovery, right? DR, disaster recovery, data resiliency, whatever your organization calls it. But basically, it's your ability as an organization to be resilient if you have a loss of data, right? Whether it's from ransomware or accidental or intentional deletion of data internally, right? It just doesn't matter. A simple thing is, how do you know that some of your files have been encrypted, right, or infected or affected? There's a number of things. I just pulled this, of course, off Microsoft's site, but there are a number of things. And as users go, most users don't pay attention to like the modified date necessarily, but they'll eventually see it, right? They can see some patterns when you open up a OneDrive or if you open up a SharePoint library that was synced with OneDrive Sync. Right, you can see some standards. So have this and understand what it looks like, and at least you'll know, what to look for in that case. Now, Microsoft absolutely has some features, right? They do not, as a service, have a backup feature, but they have sprinklings of things of recovery. Some are specific to applications, like the recycle bin can be used to get files that were deleted. But of course, unless you change your retention, unless you're using retention labels or sensitivity labels and automating a lot of these auto tagging on the back end, things are going to drop out of the recycle bin. Whatever that may, at some point they're going to drop. Right. So we'll talk about a couple other Microsoft things. So from a backup perspective, there's the OneDrive backup. OneDrive backup has a feature. You can back up your OneDrive, your desktop, your laptop. You can pull in 3 different folders, right, from there. It does have this feature within the files in your OneDrive, but it's dependent. It's dependent on version history, and it's dependent on things remaining in the recycle bin. So here's a problem with something dependent upon version history. This PowerPoint right here, this one that I've worked on, right? I can blow through 100 versions of this file within a week, touching it, modifying it. And that's just me, one person. So if I have this file in my OneDrive and I need to go back to last Thursday, but because I've modified it so many times, right? And the default, once again, right? Set it and forget it. The default is 500 versions. That might sound like a lot, but it's not 500 days, it's 500 versions. So if I select a cell in an Excel and I type, and I go to another cell and I type, I could have two different versions within a 5-second period. So when we talk about what you can do, you need to know what the lines are for Microsoft, whether you're willing to accept them, right? And if you want to accept those things, or if you need a third party. That's what it kind of ultimately comes down to. Um, e-discovery, right? Legal hold, certain things have very specific purposes. That the e-discovery was not meant as a backup, to get your data back. I mean, if you delete chat messages in Teams and it goes away, right? Once it's gone, it's accessible via e-discovery, but you can't get it back in your team. And so, sure, you have some feature. Everything that we have from holding data in here, you have to look like they were designed for very specific purposes. Understand what it offers, and see if that line is acceptable to you and your organization. Here's what's at stake when we talk about this. It's not just about a file. It's not just about backing up a file or an email. All right. Over time, especially the larger the organization, and if a company has people that are dedicated to building in 365, they're building processes, building a legal contracts site that does processing, right? You've got statuses, you've got who it's assigned to, you've got all these workflows. You've moved away from tracking your legal contracts in a spreadsheet, because now you can actually report using Power BI on the status of all of your contracts that are working in SharePoint, right? Whatever the solution was. So when we talk about getting your data back and what you need to get back, it's not just getting back a file or getting back an email. It's talking about getting back your processes that the company has kind of made this investment in. A call center call quality audit that you've created this solution around, whatever it might be, right? Your organization is using more of these awesome features, and they're crossing apps, SharePoint, Teams, Power BI, whatever, to make a solution. And so they're setting some standard internally or externally, and they're saving some time, they're saving money, but they're riddled throughout your world of what you need to protect and secure are so many processes that you've transitioned from a manual perspective. So backup, you have to just define, how quickly can you respond, right? Talk about the lines for yourself, because if we're dealing with a ransomware attack, and sure, there's the OneDrive backup. Now, is it easy for me to say, all right, we have like these 30 people, so I'm going to call up every single one of these users. I'm going to tell them to go back to their OneDrive and go into the restore and restore their OneDrive back to a certain point in time. And I'm going to do that for, let's just say, very small number, 30 people, right? So the reality of some of the features in Microsoft is that it's not enterprise level, and one of those things is your ability to recover and be resilient in your response to a ransomware attack, right? Now, whatever tool, right? Veeam is a sponsor. AvePoint is a sponsor. I've worked with both of them. I worked for a company called Drula. This is where I'm focusing on. But whatever the platform is, right? You want to go in there, and you have criteria, right? There's success criteria for your department, whatever it might, or for your organization, of what you need it to do, right? Write those up, put them on a spreadsheet, whatever it is, put your vendors across the top and start going through it, but have a criteria. If you're going to go try out backups, put together a list of things of what you need it to do. I want to back up, not just a SharePoint site, but can I recover, the settings for this team? How about this? I need to see everyone. I want to see who was in a team last 6 months ago. What are the members that were in the team 6 months ago? I mean, there's criteria that your legal, your compliance, your regulatory teams, your infosec teams, right? Reach out across that, put your spreadsheet together, find out what your success criteria is, and then go try out different tools. It doesn't matter what it is, but right, it ultimately it comes down to what it is that you need to protect out of 365, and right, which one works the best for you. So I'll end with the same message that we started with. For what is within your control, plan, prepare, act. You have a number of things on the back end of 365 that can help you protect and secure your data to ensure that you don't lose it, to ensure it's not compromised, right? It might take some time. And if you don't have the time, you don't have the bandwidth, use that reason to, to wave your hand to your leadership, to someone, to say, hey, this is what's happening in our environment. We just don't have time. We need another FTE. We need another part-time person, whatever it might be, right? To help you guys stay in control of your information, and protect that. So, all right. Well, that's it. I hope that we got through, and I hope that the topic of the day was, what you expected it to be. And I'm going to take a look to see if there's any questions here that anyone's asked. I'm going to find my glasses. That'd be a great start. All right. Okay. I don't see any questions. All right. Well, thank you guys so very much for your time today. Hopefully you learned a lot. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions that you guys are attending. All right. Have a great day.